The transmission fails. In those 3 words, everything changes. Jyn Erso's finger hovers over the button. The Death Star plans are ready. The dish is aligned, but the green beam of the super laser is already firing. 3 seconds too early. The tower explodes. The data burns. The plans die with her. The rebellion just lost the war. No thermal exhaust port. No weakness identified. No hope of destroying the Empire's ultimate weapon. The Death Star survives. Alderaan burns. Then Mon Cala. Then Ryloth. World after world reduced to ash and debris while the galaxy watches in horror. This is what happens when Scarif fails. Luke Skywalker never becomes a hero. Princess Leia dies in an Imperial cell. Han Solo remains a smuggler who never cared. The rebellion shatters into scattered cells, hunted, desperate, dying slowly while the Empire crushes every spark of resistance under the weight of unstoppable power. But here's the terrifying question nobody's asking. Could the rebellion survive without the Death Star plans? Could they find another way to fight back? Or would the galaxy fall into permanent darkness, with billions dead and freedom itself becoming nothing more than a forgotten dream? Today we're exploring the darkest timeline in Star Wars history, where hope didn't win, where the good guys lost, where one failed transmission doomed an entire galaxy. This is what happens when the rebellion fails at Scarif. The communications tower on Scarif explodes in a cascade of fire and metal. Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor are vaporized instantly as the Death Star's super laser consumes the facility. In the original timeline, they died too, but not before completing their mission. Not before that crucial data packet reached the Rebel fleet. This time, the transmission never finishes. The plans remain locked in Imperial servers, soon to be destroyed along with everything else on Scarif's surface. Above the planet, Admiral Raddus watches his scanners with growing dread. He's waiting for a transmission that will never come. His fleet is engaged in a desperate battle with Imperial Star Destroyers, taking heavy casualties, buying time for a mission that has already failed. The massive Star Destroyer Devastator drops out of hyperspace, and suddenly the battle takes on a new dimension of terror. Darth Vader has arrived. Without the Death Star plans to protect, without that critical intelligence package, the entire reason for this battle evaporates. Raddus makes the hardest call of his career. Full retreat, every ship for themselves. The Rebel fleet scatters into hyperspace, leaving behind burning wrecks and thousands of dead. The Battle of Scarif is over. The Empire has won completely. Princess Leia's Corvette, the Tantive IV, manages to escape the chaos. But she carries nothing of value. No plans. No secret weapon, no hope. She was heading to Tatooine to find Obi-Wan Kenobi, seeking the old Jedi's wisdom for the rebellion. That mission continues, but now it's hollow. What can one old Jedi do against a weapon that destroys planets? The answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Above the planet, the Rebel fleet is engaged in a desperate battle with the Imperial Star Destroyers. Admiral Raddus watches his scanners, waiting for the transmission that will never come. The massive Star Destroyer Devastator drops out of hyperspace, and Darth Vader's presence is immediately felt across the battlefield. Without the plans to protect, without that critical data package, the Rebel ships have no reason to hold their position. Raddus makes the hardest decision of his military career. He orders a full retreat. The Profundity attempts to escape, but Vader's ship is too close, too powerful. The Devastator's tractor beam locks onto the Rebel flagship. Princess Leia's Corvette, the Tantive IV, is still docked with the Profundity. In the original timeline, the plans were passed to her ship just before Vader boarded. But now there are no plans. The data was destroyed with Scarif. When Vader's stormtroopers breach the Profundity's hull, when the Dark Lord of the Sith walks through the corridors cutting down Rebel soldiers, he's searching for something that doesn't exist. Leia's ship manages to detach and jump to hyperspace, but this escape is hollow. She carries no secret weapon, no hidden hope. She's simply running. Vader's forces still capture the Tantive IV over Tatooine. Because Leia was heading there to find Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the last remaining Jedi. Even without the Death Star plans, the rebellion was seeking Kenobi's help and wisdom. When the Star Destroyer captures the Corvette, when Vader confronts Leia, the interrogation takes a different turn. She has no plans to hide, no secret mission to conceal. Under questioning and possibly torture, Leia might reveal more about the rebellion's true leadership structure, their hidden bases, their key operatives. Without the urgency of protecting the Death Star plans, the information hierarchy changes. What she knows becomes more valuable and more dangerous. This brings us to Alderaan. In the original timeline, Grand Moff Tarkin destroyed Alderaan to demonstrate the Death Star's power and to break Leia, forcing her to reveal the rebel base location. But in our timeline, does Alderaan still meet this fate? The answer is probably yes, but perhaps for different reasons. Tarkin is a man who believes in ruling through fear, in the Tarkin doctrine that overwhelming force prevents rebellion. With the Death Star now fully operational and the rebellion having failed to acquire any intelligence about it, Tarkin would likely want to make an example. Alderaan, as a known rebel sympathizer world and the home of Princess Leia Organa, would be a perfect target. Imagine the moment. The Death Star emerges from hyperspace near Alderaan. There's no Leia on board to witness it this time. She might already be imprisoned on Coruscant or another Imperial facility. But the people of Alderaan, 2 billion souls, they have no warning, no chance. Bail Organa, the senator who helped form the rebellion, who protected Leia as his daughter, who hid the truth of her parentage, he watches as the green beam charges. In seconds, one of the core worlds, a planet of culture, peace, and beauty, is reduced to asteroids. The galaxy watches in horror. The holonet broadcasts show the debris field. Tarkin's message is clear. This is what happens to those who support rebellion. But here's where our timeline truly diverges. In the original story, Alderaan's destruction, while horrific, led directly to the Death Star's weakness being exploited. The rebellion struck back at Yavin 4, destroying the Empire's ultimate weapon. It was a victory snatched from the jaws of defeat, a demonstration that even the mightiest weapon could fall. In our timeline, there is no Yavin 4 battle. There is no weak point identified. The Death Star survives. The rebellion is left reeling. They've lost Scarif, lost dozens of capital ships, lost Princess Leia, and witnessed the destruction of Alderaan without any ability to respond. Mon Mothma, Bail Organa's closest ally in the rebellion, now has to lead a resistance movement that has just suffered catastrophic defeats. The rebellion's council would convene an emergency session, likely at their base on Yavin 4 or another hidden location. The debates would be intense. Some would argue for immediate surrender, for negotiating amnesty before more worlds die. Others would push for continued resistance, for going even deeper underground. General Jan Dodonna, Admiral Akbar, and the other military leaders would be forced to confront a terrible reality. They're fighting an enemy with a weapon that can destroy planets, and they have no idea how to stop it. Traditional military strategy becomes obsolete. You can't win a war when your enemy can erase your bases, your support worlds, your entire infrastructure with a single shot. The rebellion would have to fundamentally restructure. No more large fleet actions. No more centralized bases. They would need to become a true insurgency, scattered cells with no knowledge of each other, striking soft targets and then disappearing. Now let's talk about Luke Skywalker. On Tatooine, Luke is still a farm boy dreaming of adventure. In the original timeline, R2-D2 arrived carrying Princess Leia's message and the Death Star plans. This led Luke to Obi-Wan Kenobi, who told him about his father and the Force, and ultimately set him on the path to becoming a Jedi. But in our timeline, R2-D2 either never made it to Tatooine or arrived with no critical data to deliver. Does Obi-Wan still reveal himself? Does Luke still leave Tatooine? The answer might be yes, but the circumstances would be very different. Obi-Wan Kenobi has been waiting on Tatooine for nearly 20 years, watching over Luke from a distance, waiting for the right moment to train him. The destruction of Alderaan broadcasted across the galaxy would be that moment. Obi-Wan would know that his old friend Bail Organa is dead, that Leia is captured or worse, and that the Empire has created a weapon of unimaginable power. He might seek out Luke directly, explaining his heritage and the need for new Jedi in the galaxy. But here's the crucial difference. Without the Death Star plans, without a specific mission to Alderaan and then to the Rebel base, Luke and Obi-Wan's journey would lack direction. They might still meet Han Solo and Chewbacca in the Mos Eisley Cantina, hiring them for transport off-world. But where would they go? Perhaps directly to try and find the scattered rebellion. Perhaps to Dagobah, if Obi-Wan knew of Yoda's location and decided Luke needed training immediately. Or perhaps Obi-Wan would attempt a desperate mission to rescue Leia if he knew where she was being held. Let's explore the Han Solo angle. In the original timeline, Han was a skeptical smuggler who got caught up in the rebellion by accident and profit motive. He transported Luke and Obi-Wan to Alderaan, ended up on the Death Star, rescued Princess Leia, and eventually became a hero of the rebellion. In our timeline, Han might take Obi-Wan and Luke wherever they're paying him to go, but without the dramatic rescue of a princess, without the immediate connection to the rebellion's leadership, Han would likely take his payment and leave. He'd go back to smuggling, avoiding the Empire, working for Jabba the Hutt. His character arc toward heroism and commitment might never happen. Chewbacca would remain his loyal companion, but they'd stay in the galactic underworld rather than becoming rebel heroes. The Death Star, now without any known weakness, becomes Grand Moff Tarkin's tool for enforcing absolute Imperial control. In the months following Scarif and Alderaan, Tarkin would likely target other worlds. Any planet showing rebel sympathies would receive an ultimatum: total surrender and cooperation, or destruction. Imagine the core worlds, the mid-rim, even the outer rim territories, all living under this threat. Planets like Mon Cala, home to Admiral Akbar, would face terrible choices: surrender and betray the rebellion or face extinction. Some worlds would choose destruction. The Mon Calamari people, proud and committed to freedom, might refuse to bow. The oceans of Mon Cala would boil away under the Death Star's super laser. Other species, other worlds, would make the same choice. The death toll would be staggering, billions upon billions of beings erased from existence. But most worlds would submit. Fear is a powerful motivator, and watching entire planets die is more than most populations can endure. The Empire would achieve what it always wanted: total, unquestioned control through overwhelming force. The rebellion's bases would be hunted relentlessly. Without the Death Star being destroyed at Yavin, the rebel base there would eventually be discovered. When it was, there would be no epic space battle, no desperate trench run, no last-second victory. The Death Star would simply appear in the system, charge its weapon, and fire. Yavin 4 and its ancient temples would become debris. If the rebellion survived, it would be because they evacuated in time, scattering their forces even further. The Empire's intelligence services, led by agents like Imperial Security Bureau officers and Darth Vader himself, would intensify their hunt for rebels. Vader, frustrated by the failure to capture meaningful intelligence at Scarif and from Leia, would become even more ruthless. He would personally lead missions to destroy rebel cells, using the Force to hunt down Force sensitives who might join any resistance. His obsession with finding Obi-Wan Kenobi would intensify, knowing that his former master represents one of the few threats that might challenge the Empire's supremacy. If Vader learned that Obi-Wan had emerged from hiding and was with a young Force sensitive, his interest would become consuming. In the original timeline, Vader and Obi-Wan dueled on the Death Star, with Kenobi sacrificing himself to become one with the Force. In our timeline, that confrontation might happen elsewhere, under different circumstances. If it still resulted in Obi-Wan's death, Luke would be left without a mentor, possibly without any knowledge of Yoda on Dagobah. His training as a Jedi would be incomplete or non-existent. Let's consider the role of the Emperor, Darth Sidious Palpatine. In the original timeline, he remained somewhat in the shadows, allowing Vader and his military commanders to handle the rebellion. But with the Death Star intact and the rebellion crushed or scattered, Palpatine's plans would accelerate. He'd been searching for a new apprentice, sensing Luke's potential in the Force. In our timeline, without Luke becoming a rebel hero, without him destroying the Death Star, Palpatine might not become aware of him. Or if he did, through Vader's search for Obi-Wan, he might order Luke's capture and conversion to the dark side earlier in the timeline. Imagine a young, untrained Luke Skywalker, captured by the Empire, brought before Darth Vader and the Emperor. Without the experiences that strengthened his character, without the friendship of Han and Leia, without his victories giving him confidence, Luke would be vulnerable. Palpatine's manipulation, combined with torture and dark-side corruption, might succeed in turning him. The son of Anakin Skywalker could become another dark-side enforcer, perhaps replacing the aging Vader in Palpatine's plans. The galaxy's hope would become its nightmare, but let's assume Luke avoids capture, that he and whatever rebels survive continue fighting. What would that resistance look like? Without major fleet actions, without the ability to challenge the Empire directly, the rebellion would focus on sabotage, intelligence gathering, and political resistance. They'd target Imperial supply lines, communications networks, and isolated garrisons. They'd spread propaganda, trying to keep the hope of freedom alive in populations living under the Death Star's shadow. It would be a long, grinding, probably hopeless struggle. Technology and tactics would evolve. The rebellion might focus on developing cloaking technology to hide their ships and bases from the Death Star's targeting systems. They might create mobile bases that never stay in one location long enough to be found. They might even attempt to acquire or develop their own superweapons, though this would be nearly impossible given the Empire's resources and control. Some rebel strategists might propose infiltrating the Death Star itself, either to sabotage it from within or to steal its plans for study. But without the original intelligence from Scarif, they wouldn't even know where to start looking for weak points. The role of Imperial defectors becomes crucial in this timeline. In the original story, many Imperials who witnessed the Death Star's atrocities eventually turned against the Empire. People like Iden Versio, whose story was told in Battlefront 2, defected after Alderaan. In our timeline, with multiple worlds destroyed and no rebel victories to inspire hope, would fewer Imperials defect, or would more, horrified by the scale of destruction? This is a key question. If the Empire's ruthlessness drove significant portions of its military to defection, bringing technical knowledge, ships, and trained personnel, the rebellion might gain a second wind. One potential defector of enormous value would be someone from the Death Star's construction or operation. An engineer who knew the station's systems, an officer who understood its capabilities and limitations, a technician who had access to classified files. If someone like Galen Erso had survived Scarif in our timeline, if he'd managed to escape Imperial custody, he could still provide crucial information about the Death Star's design. But Galen died on Edu before the Battle of Scarif in both timelines, killed by rebel bombing. His knowledge died with him, unless he left other messages, other clues that might be discovered. The criminal underworld would take on new importance. The Hutts, the Pike Syndicate, the Pike Spice Cartel, Black Sun, all these criminal organizations operate in the shadows, with networks the Empire can't fully control. The rebellion might forge alliances with these groups, trading intelligence and resources. Han Solo, in this timeline still a smuggler, might become an unwitting conduit for rebel operations, moving supplies and people without fully committing to the cause. The moral compromises required to work with criminals and smugglers would test the rebellion's principles, creating internal conflicts about what lines they're willing to cross. Across the galaxy, individual worlds would face their own reckonings. Mandalore, with its warrior culture, might resist and face destruction. Kashyyyk, the Wookiee homeworld already enslaved by the Empire, would see intensified oppression. Lothal, which had active rebel cells, would be made an example. Corellia, Han Solo's home and a major shipbuilding world, would be forced into even greater service to the Empire. The death toll would climb into the trillions as the Empire consolidated power. Religious and philosophical movements would respond to this darkness. The Guardians of the Wills, the order that Chirrut Imwe and Baze Malbus belonged to, would be hunted to extinction if any survived Scarif. The Church of the Force, a lay organization that believed in the Jedi teachings without being Force-sensitive themselves, would face persecution. But in the depths of this oppression, new movements might arise. People who refused to accept the Empire's rule, who clung to hope despite impossible odds, who believed that the Force or fate or simple moral necessity demanded resistance. The Jedi legacy becomes a symbol rather than a reality. With Obi-Wan and Yoda potentially the only surviving Jedi, and Luke either dead, turned, or untrained, the Jedi Order appears to have truly ended. Yet the idea of the Jedi, the stories of their heroism, their stand against injustice, would inspire resistance movements across the galaxy. People would tell stories of Luke Skywalker if his deeds became known, or of other Force sensitives who resisted the Empire. These stories, whether true or exaggerated, would become powerful propaganda. Technology development would take different paths. In the original timeline, the rebellion eventually developed B-Wings, MC-80 starcruisers, and other weapons to challenge the Empire's navy. In our timeline, with the Death Star undefeated, rebel engineers might focus on different technologies. Perhaps advanced hyperspace tracking to avoid the Death Star. Perhaps gravity well generators to trap Imperial ships. Perhaps experimental. The Death Star itself would not remain static. The Empire would continue to improve it, to refine its capabilities. Perhaps they'd develop faster recharge times for the super laser, allowing multiple planet destructions in a shorter time frame. Perhaps they'd add better defenses against fighter attacks, even though no such attack succeeded in our timeline. Perhaps they'd begin construction on a second Death Star earlier. planning to have multiple battle stations to control different regions of the galaxy simultaneously. Individual Imperial officers would rise and fall in this new order. Grand Moff Tarkin, architect of the Tarkin Doctrine, would be vindicated by the Death Star's success. He might become even more powerful, possibly second only to the Emperor himself. Director Krennic, if he survived the destruction of Scarif in our timeline, would either be executed for his security failure or elevated for overseeing the successful Death Star deployment. Admirals like Piet and Ozzel would navigate the dangerous waters of Imperial politics, knowing that failure meant death and success meant commanding the most powerful military force in history. The time frame stretches out. Years pass. The galaxy settles into a new, terrible normal. Children grow up knowing only Imperial rule, with the Death Star's existence a constant background threat. The older generation, who remember the Republic, the Clone Wars, the Jedi, they die off or stop talking about the old days. History is rewritten in Imperial schools. Palpatine becomes not just Emperor, but a figure of mythic power. The ruler who brought order from chaos, who ended the corruption of the Republic and the religious tyranny of the Jedi. But resistance endures, even in darkness. Human nature and the nature of all sentient beings includes a drive for freedom that's hard to extinguish completely. Small acts of defiance continue. A factory worker sabotages Imperial equipment. A pilot feeds information to rebel contacts. A parent teaches their children the truth about the Jedi and the Republic. These small acts don't threaten the Empire, but they keep alive the possibility that someday, somehow, things might change. The question becomes, is there any path to victory for the rebellion in this timeline? Any way to destroy or disable the Death Star without the plans from Scarif? Let's explore some possibilities. First, capture a high-ranking Imperial officer with knowledge of the Death Star, someone like Admiral Mahdi, who served on the station, or a senior engineer. Extract the information through interrogation or willing cooperation. This would be incredibly difficult, requiring infiltration of the highest levels of Imperial security, but not impossible. Second, use spies and slicers to hack Imperial networks. The Death Star, despite its power, still needs to communicate with the broader Imperial military structure. Those communications might be intercepted, decoded, studied. Over months or years, a picture of the station's layout and systems might be assembled piece by piece. A dedicated team of intelligence operatives and tech specialists, taking enormous risks, might reconstruct what was lost at Scarif. Third, find Galen Erso's research from before he was captured by the Empire. He worked on crystallography and kyber crystals for years before the Empire forced him to weaponize his knowledge. He might have left notes, protégés, hidden records. If the rebellion could access these, they might understand the Death Star's power source well enough to identify vulnerabilities. This would require tracking down Galen's old colleagues, searching his abandoned laboratories, piecing together clues from years before. Fourth, exploit the Emperor's arrogance. Palpatine and the Imperial leadership believe the Death Star is invincible. This belief might lead to complacency, to security flaws that a clever, desperate rebellion could exploit. A suicide mission, a team willing to sacrifice everything, might infiltrate the station and cause damage from within. It wouldn't have the elegant precision of targeting a thermal exhaust port, but a sufficiently powerful internal explosion, perhaps near the reactor or hypermatter storage, might destroy or cripple the station. Fifth, the emergence of a powerful Force user on the rebellion's side. If Luke was properly trained by Yoda, if he reached his potential, his abilities might allow missions that would be impossible for normal operatives. The Force grants precognition, enhanced reflexes, the ability to influence minds and sense danger. A trained Jedi leading a mission against the Death Star would have advantages that could compensate for the lack of technical intelligence. But this requires Luke surviving, avoiding corruption, and receiving training that in our timeline seems unlikely. Sixth, political pressure from within the Empire itself. Not all Imperial officers and politicians support the Death Star. Many see it as a waste of resources, a symbol of Tarkin's excessive influence, or a strategic liability that concentrates too much power in one place. If the rebellion could foster or exploit these internal divisions, they might find allies in unexpected places. An Imperial faction opposed to the Death Star might even provide intelligence or sabotage the station themselves to weaken Tarkin's position. Seventh, time itself. The Death Star, while incredibly powerful, is also incredibly expensive and resource-intensive. Some historians and strategists argue that it actually weakened the Empire by concentrating so many resources into one project. In our extended timeline, with the Death Star surviving and being used repeatedly, the Empire might overextend itself. The cost of operations, the resources diverted from the Navy and Army, the political backlash from destroyed worlds, all of these factors might eventually create vulnerabilities the rebellion could exploit. Eighth, technological breakthrough. The rebellion, driven by desperation, might develop new weapons or tactics that the Empire doesn't anticipate. In the expanded Star Wars universe, there are weapons like the Galaxy Gun and other superweapons. The rebellion might capture old separatist technology from the Clone Wars, reverse engineer it, and create something that could threaten the Death Star. Or they might ally with species or factions that have unique technological capabilities the Empire has dismissed or overlooked. None of these paths is easy. All would require years of work, incredible sacrifice, and enormous luck. But they represent the only chances the rebellion would have in a timeline where Scarif failed. The question is whether the rebellion could hold together long enough, maintain hope in the face of overwhelming odds, and survive the Death Star's campaign of terror to attempt any of these desperate strategies. Let's talk about the psychological impact of this timeline. In the original Star Wars story, hope is a central theme. Leia's message calls Obi-Wan her only hope. Luke represents a new hope for the Jedi and the galaxy. The rebellion's success at Yavin is hope, made manifest, proving the Empire can be defeated. In our timeline, hope would be nearly extinguished. How do people maintain the will to resist when every major battle is lost, when planets die by the billions, when the Empire seems truly invincible? The answer lies in smaller, more personal motivations. People wouldn't fight for galactic freedom, an abstract concept that seems impossible. They'd fight for their families, for their murdered loved ones, for the memory of their destroyed homes. They'd fight because surrender feels like betraying everyone who already died. They'd fight because rage and grief demand action, even futile action. They'd fight because the alternative, accepting the Empire's rule, accepting that might makes right and tyranny is inevitable, is worse than death. This would create a darker rebellion, less idealistic, more brutal. Tactics that might have been rejected in the original timeline, like terrorism against civilian targets associated with the Empire, might become acceptable. The moral high ground that the rebellion tried to maintain would erode under the pressure of survival. Some rebel cells might become indistinguishable from terrorists or criminals, justifying atrocities as necessary to fight the Empire. This would further complicate efforts to maintain galactic support and would alienate potential allies. The cultural impact across the galaxy would be profound. Art, music, literature, all would change. Imperial censorship would intensify, trying to eliminate any content that questioned the Empire or celebrated freedom. But underground, in hidden corners of the holonet and in physical gatherings, resistant culture would flourish. Songs about fallen worlds, poems about rebellion, stories that kept alive the memories of the Jedi and the Republic. This cultural resistance would be as important as military resistance in maintaining the spirit of opposition. Education would become a battleground. The Empire would control schools, teaching a version of history that justified their rule. But parents and secret teachers would pass down the real history, the truth about the Clone Wars, the fall of the Republic, the Jedi Purge. Each generation would have a choice: accept the Empire's lies and live in comfortable ignorance, or learn the truth and live with the burden of resistance. Most would choose the former, but enough would choose the latter to keep the rebellion alive. Religious and spiritual movements would adapt. With the Jedi gone, other Force traditions might emerge from hiding. The Night Sisters of Dathomir, the Lassans Ashla and Bogan philosophy, the Zyson Shah. All these Force-sensitive groups operating outside the Jedi tradition might become havens for those seeking to resist the Empire through mystical means. The Emperor, always hunting Force-sensitives, would target these groups, but some might survive in the most remote corners of the galaxy. The role of droids in this timeline deserves consideration. R2-D2 and C-3PO, in the original timeline, were crucial to delivering the Death Star plans and assisting the rebellion. In our timeline, if they never reached the rebellion or arrived without critical data, their impact would be minimal, but droids across the galaxy might still play important roles. Some, witnessing the Empire's cruelty, might develop the desire to resist, to help organics who fight for freedom. A droid resistance movement, operating through hacked Imperial networks and hidden communications, might provide intelligence and sabotage that biologicals couldn't accomplish. Economically, the Empire's campaign of terror would have massive impacts. Destroyed worlds mean destroyed markets, lost production, disrupted trade routes. The galactic economy, already strained by the Empire's military spending, would suffer further. Some sectors would boom, particularly those involved in weapons manufacture and military logistics, but others would collapse. Unemployment, poverty, and inequality would increase, creating more discontent that might fuel resistance. But hungry, desperate people are also easy to control with promises of food and security. The unknown regions and wild space, areas of the galaxy not fully explored or controlled, would become refuges. Rebel groups might establish bases in these remote areas beyond the Empire's reach. Species and civilizations unknown to the Empire might be contacted, asked for aid or alliance. Some might have technologies or abilities that could help resist the Empire. Others might simply offer safe havens where beings could live free from Imperial control. The exploration of these regions would be driven by necessity rather than curiosity. In this extended timeline, we might see the rise of new heroes, ordinary people pushed into extraordinary roles by circumstances. A pilot who loses their homeworld and becomes a guerrilla fighter. A politician who witnesses the Death Star's destruction and dedicates themselves to resistance. A child who grows up in the ruins of Alderaan's refugee population and trains themselves as a soldier. These individuals, lacking the force sensitivity of Luke or the royal status of Leia, would represent the rebellion's true character. Regular people choosing to fight despite impossible odds. The Death Star's crew would be an interesting study. Tens of thousands of Imperials living on the station, operating its systems, maintaining its weapons. Some would be true believers in the Empire, proud to serve on its ultimate weapon. Others would be conscripts or career officers just following orders. A few might have doubts, might be horrified by what they're part of. These doubts might be exploited by rebel intelligence, turning crew members into saboteurs or informants. The Death Star, despite its power, would remain vulnerable to threats from within. Let's dive deeper into the lives of these crew members. Imagine a young technician named Taver Arendt, assigned to the Death Star's hyperdrive maintenance division. He joined the Imperial Navy to escape poverty on his homeworld, never imagining he'd be stationed on a planet killer. The first time he witnesses the destruction of a world through the station's viewports, he's paralyzed with horror. He watches the green superlaser streak across space, watches a planet with billions of people simply cease to exist. That night in his bunk, he can't sleep. He starts to question everything he believed about the Empire bringing order and peace. But what can someone like Taver do? He's one person among tens of thousands. If he speaks out, he'll be arrested and executed. If he tries to sabotage something, he'll likely be caught before causing meaningful damage. So he does what most people in impossible situations do. He tries to convince himself it's not his fault, that he's just doing his job, that the people giving orders bear the responsibility. He goes through the motions, performs his duties, and tries not to think about the fact that his maintenance work keeps operational the machine that murders billions. But there are others like Taver. In the crew quarters, in the mess halls, in the maintenance corridors, people whisper, not openly, never where they might be overheard by Imperial Security Bureau agents or ambitious officers looking to advance their careers by reporting dissent. But the whispers are there. Some crew members begin making small mistakes in their work. Nothing dramatic enough to be noticed, but enough to slightly reduce efficiency. A targeting computer that takes a few extra seconds to lock on. A reactor cooling system that doesn't quite operate at peak performance. Death by 1,000 cuts, except the Death Star is so massive and redundant that 1,000 cuts barely registers. A few brave souls, perhaps inspired by propaganda intercepts from the rebellion or by their own consciences, might actually attempt sabotage or defection. These attempts would almost always fail. The Death Star has multiple layers of security, surveillance systems watching surveillance systems, crews working in isolated sections with no complete picture of the station's operations. An officer attempting to send classified information to the rebellion would need to bypass encryption, avoid detection, and somehow get the message off the station without being traced. Nearly impossible, but not quite impossible. Consider the story of Commander Jessa Marlin, a communications officer with access to tactical data. She's been on the Death Star for 8 months, and she's watched 3 worlds die. Unlike Taver, who struggles with guilt, Jessa has moved past guilt to rage. She begins planning, carefully, methodically. She knows she can't destroy the Death Star from within, knows she probably can't even damage it significantly. But she might be able to get information out. Information about patrol schedules, about when and where the Death Star is traveling, about security protocols. She spends weeks cultivating a relationship with a shuttle pilot, carefully feeling out his political views without revealing her own. She discovers he's loyal to the Empire, so she moves on. She tries another pilot, then another. Finally, she finds someone who seems uncertain, who makes offhand comments about the morality of their mission. She takes a risk and reveals her intentions. The pilot, a man named Kiros, is terrified but agrees to help. Together, they plan to use his next supply run to a nearby world to transmit intelligence to known rebel contacts. The day comes. Kiros loads his shuttle with the data chips Jessa has prepared, hidden inside routine supply manifests. He departs the Death Star, makes his supply delivery, and at the last moment before returning, transmits the data to a seemingly random commercial frequency that Jessa identified as a possible rebel dead drop. He returns to the Death Star. For 3 days, nothing happens. They begin to hope they succeeded. On the 4th day, Imperial Security Bureau agents arrest both of them. They're interrogated, tortured, and executed. The data they transmitted is intercepted and destroyed before reaching the rebellion. Their failure is complete, but the attempt itself matters. It shows that even on the Death Star, even among the crew operating the Empire's ultimate weapon, there are people who resist. These small acts of defiance don't change the strategic situation. The rebellion remains scattered and weak. The Death Star remains operational and deadly. But each act of resistance, no matter how small or futile, is a statement that the Empire's ideology has not completely conquered the hearts and minds of the people it controls. Medical and humanitarian impacts would be staggering. Billions of refugees from destroyed worlds would need care, food, and shelter. The Empire might establish camps, controlling these populations tightly, or they might simply abandon them, leaving refugee communities to struggle for survival. These populations would be recruiting grounds for the rebellion, people with nothing left to lose and every reason to hate the Empire. But they'd also be traumatized, desperate, and difficult to organize into effective resistance. Let's examine this refugee crisis in detail. After Alderaan's destruction, 2 billion people are simply gone. But hundreds of thousands of Alderaanians were off-world at the time. Diplomats, merchants, students, travelers, military personnel. These survivors wake up one day to discover their entire world, their families, their history, everything they knew, has been reduced to an asteroid field. The psychological trauma is unimaginable. Many survivors suffer complete mental breakdowns. Suicide rates among Alderaan survivors skyrocket in the weeks and months following the destruction. Those who maintain their sanity face impossible questions. Where do they go? Alderaan was a wealthy, influential core world. Its survivors have some resources, some connections, but they're also marked. The Empire destroyed Alderaan as punishment for supporting the rebellion. Any world that welcomes large numbers of Alderaanian refugees risks being seen as rebel sympathizers themselves. Some worlds accept small numbers quietly. Others turn the refugees away. The Empire establishes several resettlement camps in remote systems, ostensibly to help the refugees, but really to monitor and control them. But there's no time for an orderly evacuation. Only a fraction of Mon Cala's population, maybe 10%, maybe less, manages to escape. 3.5 billion Mon Calamari and Quarren remain on the planet when the super laser fires. The ocean world, famous for its beauty and its peaceful culture, boils away. The Mon Calamari survivors, scattered across dozens of ships fleeing into hyperspace, listen to the final transmissions from their homeworld. The screams, the prayers, the defiant last words of leaders choosing to die rather than submit. Then silence. The Mon Calamari refugees have an advantage over the Alderaanians. They have their ships, their fleet. The famous Mon Calamari cruisers, repurposed civilian vessels designed for exploration and commerce but armed and armored for war. These ships, carrying survivors and crewed by the remnants of Mon Cala's military, form the core of the rebellion's surviving naval forces. Admiral Akbar, if he survived this timeline's divergences, becomes even more crucial to the rebellion's leadership. He's not just a military commander now. He's a symbol, a leader of a people in exile, a representative of all those who lost their homes to the Empire's cruelty. But leading a people in exile, A people who just watch their homeworld die is almost impossible. The Mon Calamari survivors are divided. Some want to focus entirely on striking back at the Empire, on revenge regardless of the cost. Others want to focus on survival, on preserving what's left of their culture and people. Still others sink into despair, believing resistance is futile and that they should seek some kind of peace with the Empire to prevent further losses. Akbar has to hold these factions together while also coordinating military operations, managing resources, and dealing with the fact that his people are now refugees dependent on the goodwill of other systems for shelter and supplies. The refugee crisis expands as the Empire destroys more worlds. A third planet dies, then a fourth. Maybe Ryloth, the Twi'lek homeworld. Maybe Sullust, a key industrial world. Each destruction creates millions more refugees, more trauma, more rage. The galaxy's infrastructure can't handle it. Even worlds sympathetic to the refugees lack the resources to help them all. Refugee camps spread across the Outer Rim, massive tent cities and improvised settlements where beings from destroyed worlds try to rebuild some semblance of life. Disease becomes rampant in these camps. Medical supplies are limited. Sanitation is poor. Overcrowding creates perfect conditions for epidemics. A plague that might have been contained on a settled world with proper healthcare infrastructure spreads through the camps, killing thousands more. The Empire does nothing to help. In fact, some Imperial strategists view the refugee crisis as a benefit. The refugees consume resources, create social instability, and burden any systems that help them. The Empire can simply wait for the refugees to die of disease, starvation, or despair. The rebellion tries to help, but their resources are stretched impossibly thin. They're fighting a war against an enemy with infinite resources and a planet-killing superweapon, while also trying to provide humanitarian aid to billions of refugees. It's not sustainable. Rebel commanders have to make terrible choices. Do they use their limited medical supplies to treat refugees or to keep their soldiers healthy? Do they use transport ships to evacuate people from a threatened world or to move military assets? Do they use their intelligence operatives to gather tactical information or to smuggle food to starving camps? These choices tear at the rebellion's moral foundation. They formed to fight tyranny, to protect the innocent, to stand for justice. But how do you stand for justice when every choice means someone dies? When saving one group means abandoning another? Some rebel leaders become hardened, accepting that casualties are inevitable and focusing purely on military objectives. Others break under the weight of these decisions, stepping down from leadership or even leaving the rebellion entirely, unable to bear the responsibility. The passage of years would bring changes in leadership on both sides. Palpatine, already old, might eventually die or retreat further into dark side practices to extend his life. Vader, constantly injured and cyborg-dependent, might weaken or be replaced. Tarkin could be assassinated or die of natural causes. On the rebellion side, Mon Mothma, Dodonna, Akbar, and other leaders would age and potentially die, requiring new leadership to emerge. These transitions would create opportunities and dangers, moments where the balance might shift. Let's explore these leadership transitions in depth. Grand Moff Tarkin, in this timeline, survives the destruction of Yavin that killed him in the original story. He becomes even more powerful, the architect of the Empire's greatest triumph. The Death Star proves his doctrine correct. Fear works. Overwhelming force brings compliance. He's vindicated, elevated, possibly given even more authority. Tarkin begins to see himself as Palpatine's obvious successor, though he's careful not to express this ambition openly. He expands the Death Star program, pushing for construction of a second station to double the Empire's reach. But Tarkin is aging. He's in his 60s, and the stress of commanding galactic terror operations takes a toll. He suffers a stroke during a strategic meeting, not severe enough to kill him, but enough to weaken him, to make him slower, less sharp. Younger, more ambitious officers see opportunity. Director Krennic, if he survived, or someone like Admiral Motti, begins to position themselves as Tarkin's replacement. Imperial politics, always cutthroat, becomes even more vicious. Officers sabotage each other's operations, feed false information to rivals, assassinate competitors, and blame it on the rebellion. Darth Vader watches all this with contempt. He cares nothing for the squabbling of Imperial officers. These men playing at power while he serves the Emperor and hunts for Force sensitives. But Vader himself is changing. His cybernetic body requires constant maintenance. The dark side sustains him but also consumes him. In this extended timeline, with years more of service to the Emperor, Vader becomes even more machine than man. His humanity, already buried beneath layers of pain, rage, and dark-side corruption fades further. But there's a contradiction in Vader. He's the Empire's most feared enforcer, but he's also increasingly aware of his own imprisonment. The suit that keeps him alive is also his cage. Palpatine is his master, but Palpatine is also the one who left him burning on Mustafar, who keeps him in constant pain as a tool of control. In the original timeline, Luke's appearance gave Vader a reason to reconsider his choices, to remember Anakin Skywalker. In our timeline, without Luke emerging as a hero, Vader has no catalyst for redemption. He continues serving the Empire, continues hunting rebels and Force sensitives, continues sinking deeper into the dark side, unless something else triggers his reconsideration. Perhaps capturing a Force-sensitive rebel, someone young and passionate, reminds him of who he once was. Perhaps discovering information about Padme, about how she died and why, plants seeds of doubt about Palpatine's honesty. Perhaps simply the passage of time and the accumulation of atrocities makes even Vader question whether this is truly bringing order to the galaxy or simply spreading suffering. Vader's potential turn away from the Emperor, without Luke to prompt it, would have to come from within. From the last remnants of Anakin Skywalker refusing to be completely extinguished. On the rebellion side, Mon Mothma faces her own challenges. She's been leading a losing fight for years. World after world destroyed, fleet after fleet scattered or annihilated, allies too afraid to openly support the rebellion. The strain ages her rapidly. She's still brilliant, still committed, but she's also exhausted. She begins to wonder if she's leading people to meaningless deaths, if surrender might actually save lives at this point. She doesn't voice these doubts publicly, but in private moments, they consume her. General John Dodonna, the tactical genius who planned the original Death Star attack in the other timeline, is frustrated beyond measure in this one. He knows there must be a way to defeat the Death Star. Every weapon has a weakness. Every system has a vulnerability. But without the plans from Scarif, without detailed intelligence, he's operating blind. He runs simulation after simulation, trying to find an approach that might work. Direct assault with capital ships? The Death Star's defenses are too strong. Infiltration and sabotage? They don't know enough about the interior layout. Starfighter strike? Against what target? He's chasing ghosts, trying to solve an impossible puzzle with missing pieces. Admiral Akbar, dealing with the destruction of Mon Cala and the refugee crisis among his people, becomes the rebellion's most important military leader by default. The Mon Calamari fleet is now the rebellion's primary naval force. But Akbar is torn between his duty to all rebel forces and his responsibility to his own people. When a mission might result in heavy casualties among Mon Calamari crews, can he order it? When resources are needed for his refugee population versus another rebel operation, which takes priority? The burden of these dual responsibilities weighs on him constantly. New leaders emerge from unexpected places. A young Twi'lek named Hera Syndulla, who in another timeline fought the Empire during the Lothal campaign, might rise to prominence. If her crew survived this darker timeline, if Kanan Jarrus and Ezra Bridger and Sabine Wren and Zeb Orrelios managed to escape the Empire's net, they could represent a new generation of rebel leadership. Younger, more adaptable, willing to take risks that the older generation considers too dangerous. But this new generation also lacks experience, lacks the wisdom that comes from years of military and political operations. The generational divide within the rebellion creates tension. The older leaders, Mon Mothma and Dodonna and Akbar, want to preserve what remains of the rebellion, to wait for a better opportunity, to avoid catastrophic losses. The younger leaders want action, want to strike back regardless of the odds, want to prove that the rebellion isn't dead. These tensions occasionally boil over into open conflict, with younger officers accusing the old guard of cowardice and older leaders accusing the young of reckless stupidity. Emperor Palpatine himself remains the ultimate threat. His mastery of the dark side grows stronger with each passing year. He's learned from ancient Sith texts how to extend his life through dark rituals and Force techniques. His body ages, becoming increasingly frail and corrupted by the dark side, but his power and his mind remain sharp. Palpatine views the Death Star as a useful tool but not his true source of power. The dark side of the Force, his manipulation of galactic politics, his network of agents and spies, these are what really control the Empire. Palpatine continues his search for a suitable apprentice. Vader is powerful but damaged, both physically and in terms of his Force potential. The Emperor wants someone young, someone who can be molded completely, someone whose potential hasn't been limited by injury or doubt. He has Inquisitors and dark side adepts scouring the galaxy for Force-sensitive children and adults. Most are too weak or too resistant to training, but occasionally one shows promise. Imagine Palpatine's interest if he learned about Luke Skywalker, if Imperial intelligence identified a young Force-sensitive on Tatooine connected to Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Emperor would send Vader, knowing the confrontation between Vader and his former master would be delicious in its irony. He'd want Luke captured alive, brought to Coruscant, assessed for his potential. A showdown between Vader and Obi-Wan would be inevitable, perhaps on Tatooine itself, with Luke's fate hanging in the balance. This confrontation would be different from their duel on the Death Star. Both combatants are older. Obi-Wan much older and Vader more machine. But Obi-Wan has had years of meditation and connection with the Force, while Vader has been consumed by the dark side's power. The duel might end the same way, with Obi-Wan sacrificing himself and becoming one with the Force. But the impact on Luke would be different without the context of a rescue mission, without the immediate support of Han and Leia. Luke might be captured, might fall to the dark side, might become the Emperor's new apprentice. Alternatively, Luke might escape with help from unlikely allies. Perhaps a group of Tusken Raiders, whom Obi-Wan had befriended over the years, intervenes. Perhaps a smuggler with rebel connections happens to be on Tatooine and helps. Perhaps the Force itself guides Luke to safety, providing visions and instincts that let him evade capture. Luke fleeing into the desert, alone and terrified, hunted by the Empire, would be a dark mirror of his heroic journey in the original timeline. Now let's examine the broader galactic situation after 5 years of Death Star supremacy. The Empire has destroyed 6 major worlds: Alderaan, Mon Cala, Ryloth, Sullust, and 2 others, perhaps Bothawi and Corellia. Tens of billions are dead. The refugee population exceeds 5 billion beings. The galactic economy is in shambles in many sectors. The rebellion has been reduced to scattered cells operating independently, with little central coordination. Many systems that privately supported the rebellion have publicly declared loyalty to the Empire and cut all ties with resistance movements. But the Empire faces its own problems. The cost of the Death Star program is enormous. Even with total control of the Imperial Senate and taxation system, the resources required to maintain and operate the Death Star strain the budget. Tarkin requests funds for a second Death Star. Palpatine approves, but this means cuts elsewhere. The Imperial Navy gets fewer new Star Destroyers. Planetary garrisons are reduced. Infrastructure projects in the core worlds are delayed. These cuts create resentment among Imperial officers and administrators who see their resources diverted to Tarkin's pet project. The destroyed worlds also have economic impacts. Alderaan was a major cultural and educational center. Its loss means a loss of art, music, literature, historical archives. Mon Cala was crucial for shipbuilding, producing both civilian and military vessels. Its destruction forces the Empire to rely more heavily on Kuat drive yards and other facilities, creating bottlenecks and delays. Sullust's industrial output is gone. Corellia's shipyards are reduced to slag. Each loss cascades through the galactic economy, creating shortages, unemployment, and hardship. These hardships don't automatically translate to rebellion. Most people, faced with the choice between resistance and survival, choose survival. They accept the Empire's rule, follow the laws, and try to protect their families. But hardship creates an undercurrent of resentment, a background dissatisfaction that the rebellion might eventually exploit. If the Empire makes a mistake, if it shows weakness, the resentment could explode into open revolt. But as long as the Death Star remains operational and the Empire appears invincible, most people stay quiet. The black market and criminal underworld flourish in this environment. With so much disruption to legitimate trade, smugglers and criminals fill the gaps. The Hutt cartels expand their influence. Black Sun, the criminal syndicate, becomes more powerful. Independent operators like Han Solo find endless opportunities for profit. These criminals don't care about the Empire or the rebellion generally. They care about credits. But their activities create networks that the rebellion can use. Channels for moving supplies, information, and people outside Imperial control. Let's talk about specific rebel operations in this extended timeline. Without the ability to fight major fleet actions or defend fixed bases, the rebellion focuses on guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run attacks on Imperial convoys, sabotage of Imperial facilities, assassination of key Imperial officers and officials, information warfare, spreading propaganda and undermining the Empire's public image. These operations can't defeat the Empire, but they can make Imperial control more difficult and more expensive. One particularly daring operation might target the Death Star's supply chain. The station requires enormous amounts of supplies, food for tens of thousands of crew, fuel for its hyperdrive and reactor, maintenance parts for its countless systems, ammunition for its weapons. These supplies have to come from somewhere, transported by supply ships on predictable routes. A rebel cell might begin targeting these supply runs, not expecting to significantly harm the Death Star, but hoping to gather intelligence about its operations and perhaps even smuggle a spy or saboteur aboard a supply ship. The operation is led by a rebel intelligence officer named Draven, the same man who ordered the bombing of Ayadu in the original timeline. He's older now, more bitter, more willing to accept collateral damage. He assembles a team of specialists, a slicer to hack Imperial supply manifests, a pilot capable of precision strikes, a commando team to board and capture supply vessels. Over 6 months, they successfully intercept 3 supply ships bound for the Death Star. They capture crew members for interrogation, steal data about the Death Star's location and schedule, and even manage to plant a listening device in one shipment that makes it aboard the station. The intelligence gathered is valuable but limited. They learn about patrol patterns, about security procedures, about the general layout of supply docking bays, but they don't learn anything that would let them destroy the Death Star. The station is simply too large, too redundant, too well defended. Draven's operation is eventually compromised when one of his team members is captured and tortured. The Empire traces the operation back, destroys the rebel cell, executes everyone involved. Draven himself dies in the final Imperial assault, defiantly sending one last burst transmission to other rebel cells. Keep fighting. Find the weakness. It has to exist. Another operation might focus on turning Imperial officers. A rebel psychological warfare specialist, perhaps someone who served in the Republic Intelligence Service before the Empire, develops profiles of potentially sympathetic Imperials. She identifies officers who joined for idealistic reasons, who believed the Empire would bring order and peace, who are now horrified by the Death Star's atrocities. She makes contact through covert channels, feeling them out, gradually revealing her rebel connections. Most of these contacts go nowhere. The Imperial officer reports the contact to ISB, and the rebel agent barely escapes. But occasionally she finds someone receptive, an Imperial Navy captain who lost family when Alderaan was destroyed, even though he served the Empire. A stormtrooper whose homeworld was threatened by the Death Star. A bureaucrat who sees the economic damage the Empire is causing. These individuals begin pass. These defectors are incredibly valuable but also problematic. Can they be trusted? Are they genuine defectors or Imperial plants sent to infiltrate the rebellion? The rebellion has to vet each defector carefully, a process that takes time and resources. Some genuine defectors are rejected out of caution. Some Imperial plants are accepted and cause terrible damage before being discovered. The paranoia and distrust poison the rebellion's culture, making everyone suspect everyone else. Technology development continues on both sides. The Empire, confident in the Death Star's supremacy, still invests in other weapons. TIE fighters are upgraded with shields and hyperdrives, creating the TIE Advanced and TIE Defender models. Star Destroyers get more powerful weapons and better sensors. New classes of capital ships are designed. The Empire also experiments with other superweapons, learning from the Death Star's success. Perhaps an orbital bombardment platform that's cheaper and faster to build than a full battle station. Perhaps a weapon that can render a planet's surface uninhabitable without destroying it completely. Creating prison planets where rebel supporters can be exiled. The rebellion's technology development is more desperate and improvised. They can't build large capital ships without the industrial base, so they focus on improving starfighters and developing new tactics. B-Wings are designed as heavy assault fighters capable of taking on capital ships. A-Wings are developed as ultra-fast interceptors. They experiment with cloaking technology, trying to create ships that can bypass Imperial sensors. They develop new explosives and weapons specifically designed to damage Imperial hardpoints and shields, one intriguing possibility. is that the rebellion captures or recovers separatist battle droids from the Clone Wars. In the chaos of those wars' end, massive droid armies were supposedly shut down and scrapped, but not all of them. A rebel expedition to a forgotten separatist base might find thousands of battle droids in storage, along with manufacturing equipment. Reactivating and reprogramming these droids could give the rebellion a sudden influx of soldiers. The droids aren't as capable as organic soldiers in many ways, but they don't fear death, don't need food or rest, and can be deployed in situations where organic casualties would be unacceptable. The use of battle droids raises ethical questions within the rebellion. The Clone Wars were fought against droid armies. Many rebels remember the droids as symbols of the separatist threat. Using them feels like a betrayal of Republic values, but desperate times call for desperate measures. If a droid army could give the rebellion a fighting chance, isn't it worth the moral compromise? The debate splits the rebellion's leadership, with some embracing the droids as a necessary tool and others refusing to deploy them. Let's explore life on a planet under heavy Imperial occupation in this timeline. Take Lothal, a relatively minor Outer Rim world that had an active rebel cell in the years before Scarif. After the Death Star's campaign begins, Lothal is occupied by increased Imperial forces, a demonstration world showing what happens when the Empire decides to fully control a system. A massive Imperial garrison is established. Stormtroopers patrol every city. Curfews are enforced. Anyone suspected of rebel sympathies is arrested, interrogated, often tortured. The local population lives in fear. Collaboration with the Empire becomes necessary for survival. People inform on their neighbors to avoid suspicion falling on themselves. Children are taught Imperial propaganda in schools, learning that the Emperor saved the galaxy from chaos and that the Jedi were traitors. The planet's resources are extracted at increased rates to feed the Imperial war machine. Factories operate around the clock producing Imperial equipment. Workers are paid barely enough to survive and have no legal recourse against abuse, but even here, resistance flickers. A group of teenagers, too young to remember the Republic but raised on whispered stories from their parents, form a small resistance cell. They're not capable of major operations. They spray anti-Imperial graffiti on walls. They sabotage factory equipment in subtle ways. They help people evade arrest by providing hiding places and forged documents. It's not much, but it's something. It's a refusal to accept Imperial rule as normal and inevitable. One of these teenagers, a girl named Lyra, becomes bolder. She wants to do more than graffiti and minor sabotage. She starts stealing Imperial weapons from supply depots. She recruits others to her cause. They plan an attack on the Imperial garrison's shield generator, hoping to create an opening for a rebel strike. But they're inexperienced, and their operational security is poor. Imperial intelligence learns of the plan. When Lyra and her team attack the generator, they walk into an ambush. Most are killed. Lyra is captured. The Imperials make an example of Lyra. She's tortured for weeks, both to extract information about other resistance members and to break her spirit. Then she's put on trial, a show trial where the outcome is predetermined. She's found guilty of treason, terrorism, and murder. The sentence is public execution. The entire city is required to attend. Lyra is brought to a platform in the city square. She's given a chance to recant, to beg the Emperor's forgiveness, to encourage others to remain loyal. She refuses. Her last words are, "The Empire will fall. Maybe not today, but someday, and I'll die knowing I fought for something worth fighting for." Lyra's execution is meant to intimidate, to crush resistance. But it has the opposite effect on some who witness it. Her courage, her refusal to submit even at the end, inspires others. New resistance cells form, named in her honor. Her last words are repeated in whispers, becoming a rallying cry. The Empire created a martyr, and martyrs are more dangerous than living rebels because they can't be killed again, can't be intimidated or broken. Lyra's story spreads beyond Lothal, carried by refugees and smugglers, becoming part of the growing mythology of resistance. Similar stories play out across the galaxy. On thousands of worlds, ordinary people make the choice to resist, knowing they'll probably die, knowing their actions might not change anything but refusing to accept tyranny without fighting back. Each individual story is tragic, a life lost, a family destroyed. But collectively, these stories form a narrative that challenges the Empire's claim of inevitable victory. They prove that the human spirit, and the spirit of all sentient beings, can't be completely conquered through fear and violence alone. The Force itself might respond to this darkness. In Star Wars lore, the Force seeks balance. The rise of the dark side eventually prompts the rise of the light to counteract it. In the original timeline, Luke Skywalker was that response, the light side champion who restored the Jedi Order. In our timeline, without Luke as a trained Jedi, the Force might work through other means. Perhaps Force-sensitive individuals across the galaxy begin experiencing visions, dreams that call them to resist the Empire. Perhaps latent Force abilities begin manifesting more frequently, as if the Force itself is trying to create new champions. These untrained Force sensitives would be dangerous to themselves and others. Without Jedi to guide them, they might use their abilities recklessly or fall to the dark side. But some might find ways to train themselves through meditation, study of ancient texts, and experimentation. Small groups of Force sensitives might band together, forming new orders that aren't exactly Jedi but share similar goals. These new Force traditions might eventually become allies to the rebellion, providing abilities and insights that normal soldiers lack. One such group might be founded by Ahsoka Tano, Anakin Skywalker's former Padawan. In the original timeline, Ahsoka fought the Empire during the early rebellion years and eventually survived to the post-Empire era. In our darker timeline, Ahsoka would still be operating as Fulcrum, a rebel intelligence agent. She might take on the role of gathering and training Force sensitives, creating a network of Force users who can support the rebellion. She'd have to operate in absolute secrecy, knowing that Vader and the Inquisitors would hunt her and her students relentlessly. But Ahsoka is capable, experienced, and committed. If anyone could keep such a network hidden and effective, it would be her. The construction of the second Death Star would be a major event in this extended timeline. The Empire announces the project publicly, framing it as necessary to maintain order in the galaxy's far reaches. 2 Death Stars would allow the Empire to threaten any system simultaneously, eliminating safe havens and ensuring no world could rebel without immediate consequences. The announcement sends shockwaves through the galaxy. The horror of 1 Death Star was barely comprehensible. 2 means the Empire's terror campaign will only intensify. The second Death Star is built in orbit of Endor, a remote system in the Outer Rim, just like in the original timeline. But without the rebel victory at Yavin, the Empire is more confident, less concerned about security. They still protect the construction site heavily, but there's an arrogance to their operations. They believe the rebellion is finished, incapable of mounting any serious threat. This arrogance might be their weakness, the opening the rebellion needs. A rebel intelligence network discovers the second Death Star's construction. This is the opportunity they've desperately needed. A Death Star under construction is vulnerable in ways a completed station isn't. Its weapons aren't operational. Its shields aren't at full strength. Its systems are incomplete. This mission would be the rebellion's greatest gamble, requiring every ship they can muster, every fighter, every soldier. They'd have to gather their scattered forces, coordinate across dozens of cells, and strike with everything they have. The risk is total. If the mission fails, the rebellion will be effectively destroyed. If it succeeds, they might turn the tide of the war. Mon Mothma, Akbar, and the surviving rebel leaders make the decision. They'll attack the second Death Star at Endor. The preparation for this mission takes months. Ships are repaired and retrofitted. Pilots are trained. Commandos rehearse boarding actions and sabotage techniques. Intelligence operatives work desperately to gather information about the Endor system, about the Death Star's defenses, about Imperial fleet positions. The rebellion knows they get one chance. Everything depends on this. Either they win or they die trying. The plan for the Battle of Endor in this timeline would be different from the original. In the original timeline, the rebels knew about the second Death Star's shield generator on the forest moon, knew about the trap the Emperor had set, but went anyway because they had to take the risk. In our timeline, the rebellion has less intelligence but also faces less sophisticated Imperial deception. They don't know about the shield generator. They don't know the Emperor is personally overseeing the Death Star's completion. They don't know the Imperial fleet is waiting in ambush. They simply know there's a half-built Death Star at Endor, and they have to destroy it before it becomes operational. The rebel fleet gathers at a rendezvous point in deep space. It's the largest gathering of rebel forces in years, maybe since the disastrous Battle of Scarif itself. Mon Calamari cruisers, Corellian corvettes, Nebulon B frigates, converted civilian vessels armed with whatever weapons could be installed, hundreds of starfighters, X-Wings, Y-Wings, A-Wings. Even some old Z-95 headhunters and ARC-170s left over from the Clone Wars. It's an impressive force by Rebel standards, but tiny compared to the Imperial Navy. Admiral Akbar commands the fleet from his flagship. He knows this is a suicide mission for many of them, perhaps for all of them. But it's their only chance. The Rebel fleet jumps to hyperspace, heading for Endor. As they emerge from hyperspace, they immediately realize something is wrong. The second Death Star is more complete than their intelligence suggested. Its weapons may not all be operational, but enough are. And the Imperial fleet is here, waiting for them. Star Destroyers, dozens of them, arrayed in defensive positions around the Death Star. TIE fighters launching in massive swarms. The trap is sprung. Admiral Akbar realizes immediately that they've been set up, that Imperial intelligence knew they were coming. He faces the same decision he'd face in the original timeline. Retreat and preserve the fleet, or commit to the attack despite impossible odds. Akbar chooses to fight. They've come too far, sacrificed too much to turn back now. The order goes out, all ships attack. The Battle of Endor begins. It's absolute chaos. Rebel capital ships engage Imperial Star Destroyers at close range, where their lighter weapons can do damage. Starfighters dogfight with TIE fighters in massive furball engagements. I-Wings make bombing runs on Star Destroyer shield generators and sensor arrays. A-Wings use their speed to penetrate Imperial fighter screens and attack command ships. The second Death Star, even incomplete, begins firing its super laser. Unlike in the original timeline where it targeted individual Rebel capital ships, in our timeline the Death Star's targeting systems aren't precise enough for that. Instead, it fires into the general area of the Rebel fleet. Each shot takes minutes to recharge, but when it fires, whatever it hits is obliterated. A Mon Calamari cruiser disappears in green light. A cluster of Rebel frigates evaporates. The psychological impact is devastating. Rebel crews watch their comrades die by the thousands with each shot, knowing they could be next. But the Rebel attack isn't without effect. Their concentrated assault damages several Star Destroyers. One Rebel cruiser, its hyperdrive failing and engines crippled, makes a final desperate move. It rams a Star Destroyer at full sublight speed, the impact destroying both vessels and creating a debris field that temporarily disrupts Imperial fighter operations. A squadron of Y-Wings manages to get through the Imperial fighter screen and land hits on the second Death Star's surface, damaging construction equipment and exposed systems. It's not enough to destroy the station, but it sets back the construction timeline. Meanwhile, a small team of Rebel commandos attempts a desperate infiltration. They know they can't destroy the Death Star from the outside, not with the fleet they have. So they're trying to get inside, to sabotage the reactor or critical systems from within. The team is led by a hardened veteran, perhaps someone like Saw Gerrera if he survived this timeline's events, or a new character forged in the fires of this darker war. They use a captured Imperial shuttle to approach the Death Star, broadcasting stolen clearance codes. The infiltration almost works. They manage to land in a docking bay, fight their way through stormtrooper security, and penetrate deeper into the station. They're heading for what they believe is the main reactor, based on stolen schematics and guesswork. But the Death Star is enormous, a maze of corridors and chambers. They get lost, turned around. Imperial security is closing in, alerted by the firefight at the docking bay. The team is running out of time. The leader makes a desperate decision. They can't reach the reactor, but they can damage what's in front of them. They have thermal detonators, a lot of them, enough to cause significant destruction in a localized area. If they're near something critical, it might be enough. If not, at least they'll die fighting. They set the detonators, programming them for maximum yield and minimal delay. The team tries to escape, but Imperial forces cut them off. They die fighting, giving their lives to buy seconds for their bombs to detonate. The explosion rips through several levels of the Death Star. By sheer luck, one of the damaged areas contains a major power conduit feeding the super laser. The weapon goes offline, giving the Rebel fleet a momentary reprieve. But the damage isn't enough to destroy the station, only to wound it. The Emperor, watching from his throne room, is enraged. He orders the Imperial fleet to intensify its attack, to annihilate the Rebel fleet completely. The battle turns decisively against the Rebels. They're outnumbered, outgunned, and taking catastrophic losses. Admiral Akbar's flagship is heavily damaged. Nearly half the Rebel capital ships are destroyed or crippled. Fighter losses are even worse. It's becoming clear that the rebellion is about to suffer its final total defeat. Akbar prepares to order a retreat, to save what remains of the fleet. But before he can give the order, something unexpected happens. A portion of the Imperial fleet turns on the rest. Several Star Destroyers open fire on their own side. Confused reports flood the comm channels. A mutiny. A group of Imperial officers, horrified by the Death Star and the Empire's atrocities, have chosen this moment to defect. They're not doing it for the rebellion specifically. They're doing it because they can't serve the Empire anymore, can't be part of genocide on a galactic scale. Their defection is disorganized, desperate, but it tilts the battle's balance. The Imperial fleet is now fighting itself. The Loyalist ships turn to engage the mutineers. The Death Star, its super laser offline, can't effectively target the fast-moving capital ships engaged in close combat. The Rebel fleet, given a brief window, presses its attack. Akbar orders all remaining bombers to target the second Death Star, to hit it with everything they have. If they can't destroy it, maybe they can damage it enough to delay its completion by months or years. The bombing run is reminiscent of the trench run from the original timeline, but larger, more chaotic. Dozens of Y-wings and other bombers swarm the Death Star's surface, targeting exposed reactor ports, construction zones, weapon emplacements. TIE fighters pursue them, shooting down bomber after bomber. But enough get through. Explosions ripple across the Death Star's surface. Secondary explosions begin as damaged systems fail and cascade. The station isn't destroyed, its core structure remains intact, but it's badly damaged. Months of construction work is undone in minutes. Darth Vader, commanding one of the Imperial Star Destroyers, watches the battle with a mixture of rage and something else, something he doesn't quite recognize. Doubt, the mutiny of Imperial officers, the rebellion's desperate courage, the failure of the Empire's ultimate weapon to prevent resistance. He feels a disturbance in the Force, a shift in the currents of fate. The dark side whispers that the Emperor's vision of order through fear is flawed, that power alone cannot achieve lasting control. Vader dismisses these thoughts as weakness, but they linger. The Emperor, feeling the same disturbance, intensifies his efforts. He reaches out with the Force, using battle meditation to coordinate the Loyalist Imperial forces, turning the tide against the mutineers. His power is vast, his mastery complete. One by one, the mutinous Star Destroyers are overwhelmed and destroyed. The Rebel fleet, seeing the mutiny crushed, realizes they have no more chances. Akbar orders the retreat. The surviving Rebel ships jump to hyperspace, abandoning those too damaged to escape. The Battle of Endor is over. The rebellion achieved its goals partially. The second Death Star is damaged, its completion delayed significantly. They proved the Empire is not invincible, that resistance is possible. But the cost was staggering. More than half the Rebel fleet was destroyed. Thousands of rebels died. And the second Death Star, while damaged, still stands. It will be repaired. It will become operational. The rebellion bought time, nothing more. In the aftermath, both sides assess the damage and adjust strategies. The Empire hunts the mutineers who escaped and purges any officers suspected of disloyalty. Security protocols are intensified. The second Death Star's construction becomes a top priority, with resources diverted from across the Empire to speed the repairs. The Emperor personally oversees the work, his presence ensuring no further delays or sabotage. He's also intrigued by the rebel tactics, by their ability to cause such damage despite overwhelming disadvantage. He orders his intelligence services to intensify their hunt for rebel leadership. The rebellion, scattered again after Endor, struggles to maintain cohesion. They lost so many ships, so many experienced personnel, but they also gained something intangible, proof that the Empire can be hurt, that Death Stars can be damaged, that Imperial officers can be turned. The mutiny at Endor becomes a propaganda tool, evidence that even the Empire's own people are rebelling against its tyranny. The rebellion spreads this story across the galaxy, trying to inspire more defections, more resistance. The war continues, grinding on year after year. Small victories and large defeats, worlds liberated briefly before Imperial forces reconquer them. Rebel cells discovered and destroyed, new cells forming from survivors and recruits. It's a war of attrition, and the Empire has far more resources to attrit. But the rebellion has something the Empire can't quantify or counter: the will to keep fighting despite impossible odds. Let's examine the state of the galaxy 10 years after Scarif's failure. The Empire controls most known space through a combination of military force, political manipulation, and fear of the Death Star. The first Death Star is still operational, used sparingly now because the cost of destroying worlds is finally being recognized as potentially destabilizing. The second Death Star, repaired and completed after Endor, patrols a different region. Together they represent the Empire's ultimate threat, capable of destroying any two targets simultaneously. But cracks are forming in the Empire's facade. The economy is struggling under the weight of military spending. Corruption is rampant among Imperial officials, who enrich themselves while planets suffer. The destroyed worlds have created massive refugee crises that strain resources and create instability. And the rebellion, while weak, refuses to die. They've become a persistent irritant, conducting operations the Empire can't completely stop without diverting resources it needs elsewhere. On Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine sits on his throne, feeling the Force shift around him. He's achieved everything he planned. The Jedi are gone. The Sith rule the galaxy. The Republic is a memory. But something is wrong. The dark side, which always promised ultimate power, feels unstable. The more he grips, the more slips through his fingers. Planets destroyed return as martyrs inspiring resistance. Officers intimidated become resentful and unreliable. Power achieved through fear alone requires constant reinforcement, constant displays of strength, constant violence. It's exhausting even for the most powerful Sith Lord in history. Palpatine considers his legacy. He's old, his body failing despite his dark side techniques to extend life. Vader is capable but damaged, unlikely to rule effectively as Emperor. The Empire needs a new generation of leaders who truly believe in its mission, who can maintain control not through fear alone, but through genuine loyalty. He establishes new programs to identify and train Force-sensitive youth, creating a new order of dark side adepts who might eventually become Sith. He reforms Imperial education, creating academies designed to produce ideologically committed officers and administrators. But these long-term plans require time, decades at least, to bear fruit. And Palpatine is running out of time. His body continues to deteriorate despite his best efforts. He begins experimenting with cloning, with transfer essence techniques, with forbidden dark side rituals that might let him cheat death completely. His desperation grows, and with it, his decisions become more erratic, more brutal. He orders purges of entire sectors suspected of harboring rebels. He destroys worlds not as calculated demonstrations, but in fits of rage. His grip on power tightens even as it becomes more tenuous. Darth Vader observes all this with increasing detachment. He's served the Emperor for decades now, hunted rebels and Jedi, enforced Imperial will across the galaxy. But the Force disturbance he felt at Endor has grown stronger. He meditates in his chamber, something he rarely does, and finds himself thinking about Padme, about the person he was before Mustafar, about whether the order and peace he thought he was creating has actually materialized, or if he's simply perpetuated suffering on a galactic scale. These thoughts are dangerous. The dark side feeds on negative emotion, on pain and rage and hatred. Doubt undermines that foundation. If Vader begins to question his choices, to regret his path, the dark side's hold on him weakens. He tries to suppress these thoughts, to bury them under layers of anger and commitment to the Empire. But they persist, growing stronger. He needs something to anchor him, to give his service meaning. If he can't find it, he might do something unthinkable. Luke Skywalker, in this timeline, has had a very different life. Let's say he escaped capture by the Empire after Obi-Wan's death. He spent years wandering the galaxy, trying to understand the Force on his own, helping small rebel cells where he can, staying ahead of the Inquisitors hunting Force sensitives. He's not the trained Jedi of the original timeline, but he's learned through experience and meditation. He's powerful but raw, capable of incredible feats, but also prone to mistakes and dark side temptations. Luke has heard stories about Darth Vader, knows he was once a Jedi named Anakin Skywalker, knows he's his father. This knowledge has tormented Luke for years. How does he reconcile his desire to honor his father's memory with the reality of what Vader has become? How can someone who was supposedly a hero fall so completely? Luke has avoided confronting Vader, knowing he's not strong enough to defeat him. But he also knows that eventually, the confrontation is inevitable. That confrontation comes during a rebel operation that goes wrong. Luke is helping evacuate civilians from a planet targeted for Imperial reprisals. Vader arrives commanding the Imperial forces. He senses Luke's presence in the Force, recognizes the potential, realizes this must be his son. Instead of simply killing him, Vader wants to capture him, to bring him before the Emperor, or perhaps to turn him personally. The two face each other in the ruins of a burning city. Their duel is raw and emotional. Luke fights with desperation and untrained ferocity. Vader fights with practiced skill and overwhelming power. But Vader is also conflicted. He's fighting his son, the last link to Padme, the last chance at something resembling family. He doesn't want to kill Luke. He wants to turn him, to have someone he can actually connect with in the cold emptiness of his existence. This conflict makes him less effective than he should be. Luke, sensing Vader's hesitation, makes a desperate gamble. Instead of trying to fight, he reaches out with the Force, trying to find Anakin Skywalker beneath Vader's mask. He speaks to his father, not to Vader, but to the man he was. He talks about Padme, about her belief in good, about how she wouldn't want this legacy of suffering. For a moment, something shifts. Vader falters. The dark side's grip loosens slightly, but only for a moment. The Emperor, feeling this disturbance through the Force, reaches out from across the galaxy. He uses his connection to Vader, his mastery of the dark side, to reinforce Vader's commitment and crush any doubt. Vader screams in pain and rage, the internal conflict tearing at him. He lashes out at Luke with renewed fury, driving him back, nearly killing him. Luke barely escapes, fleeing with the help of rebel commandos who provide covering fire. The confrontation changes both of them. Luke realizes he can't redeem his father through words alone, that Vader is too far gone, too deeply corrupted by the dark side. He stops seeing redemption as possible and starts seeing Vader as an enemy who must be defeated. This hardens Luke, makes him colder, more willing to use aggressive Force techniques. He begins walking a dangerous line between light and dark. Vader, after the confrontation, is shaken. For a brief moment, he felt something other than pain and rage. He felt the possibility of a different path. The Emperor's intervention reminded him why that path is closed, why he can never go back. But the seed of doubt has been planted. It will grow, slowly, painfully, until it eventually forces a choice. The rebellion's leadership continues to evolve. Mon Mothma, now in her 60s, steps back from day-to-day operations. She remains an easier advisor and figurehead, but younger leaders take over tactical and strategic command. Admiral Akbar, despite his age, remains the fleet commander, his experience and reputation too valuable to replace. New faces emerge. A brilliant strategist named Crix Medine, who defected from the Empire and brings insider knowledge. A charismatic pilot named Wedge Antilles, who survived. These new leaders bring fresh perspectives but also inexperience. They make mistakes, learning through trial and error how to fight an enemy that outclasses them in every conventional measure. They experiment with new tactics, coordinated strikes across multiple systems to divide Imperial forces, propaganda campaigns to inspire defections, economic warfare targeting Imperial supply chains. Some tactics work, many fail. But each attempt teaches them something, gradually building institutional knowledge that makes the rebellion more effective. The rebellion also focuses on preserving knowledge and history. They know that even if they lose militarily, if the truth about the Empire's crimes and the Republic's ideals can be preserved, future generations might continue the fight. Rebel historians compile records of destroyed worlds, testimonies from survivors, evidence of Imperial atrocities. These records are hidden across the galaxy, in data caches and physical archives, ensuring that no matter what happens to the rebellion, the truth will survive. Cultural resistance becomes increasingly important. Artists, musicians, writers all contribute to the rebellion in their own ways. A composer writes a symphony called Alderaan's Lament, which becomes an underground hit, played secretly in homes across the galaxy. A poet writes verses about freedom and resistance that are memorized and shared, spreading through oral tradition when written copies are too dangerous. A holo-director creates a documentary about the last days of the Republic, explaining what was lost when the Empire rose. These cultural works don't directly fight the Empire, but they maintain the spirit of resistance, keeping alive ideas and values the Empire wants to extinguish. On worlds under Imperial control, everyday people find small ways to resist. A factory worker produces faulty components that will fail in Imperial equipment. A teacher includes forbidden history and lessons, teaching children the truth about the Jedi and the Republic. A merchant provides supplies to rebel sympathizers at below cost, financially supporting resistance at personal risk. A mother raises her children with stories of freedom and justice, ensuring the next generation knows what they're fighting for. These small acts accumulate, creating a hidden infrastructure of resistance woven through the fabric of galactic society. The Force continues to play its mysterious role. Force-sensitive children are born across the galaxy, their abilities manifesting in subtle ways. The Empire hunts them, trying to capture them for the Inquisitorius or eliminate them as threats. But many slip through the net, hidden by parents or communities, growing up with secret knowledge of their abilities. Some eventually find their way to Ahsoka Tano's network of Force sensitives, receiving training and joining the broader resistance. Others operate alone, using their gifts to help their communities and avoid Imperial notice. One such Force sensitive is a young woman named Kira, born on a planet devastated by Imperial occupation. She discovers her abilities after her family is killed in an Imperial raid. Grief and rage unlock her connection to the Force, and she uses it instinctively to survive, to fight back, to protect others. She's not a Jedi, knows nothing of the Jedi code or philosophy, but she's powerful and determined. She becomes a local hero, a legend whispered about in refugee camps and resistance cells. The Empire sends Inquisitors to capture or kill her. She evades them, learning to mask her presence in the Force, staying one step ahead of her hunters. Kira eventually encounters Luke Skywalker during one of his travels. They recognize each other as kindred spirits, two Force sensitives trying to survive and fight in a galaxy hostile to their existence. Luke offers to train her, to teach her what he's learned. She accepts, becoming his first student. Together, they begin to form something like a new Jedi Order, though they don't call it that. They gather other Force sensitives, teach them what they know, and send them out to support the rebellion. It's a shadow of the old Jedi Order, lacking its discipline and wisdom, but it's a beginning. The years continue to pass. The war grinds on. The galaxy settles into a terrible equilibrium. The Empire controls through fear and force, but can't completely eliminate resistance. The rebellion survives through determination and ingenuity, but can't defeat the Empire militarily. Both sides are locked in a stalemate that could last decades, generations, indefinitely. But history teaches us that stalemates eventually break. Some event, some shift in circumstances creates an opening. Maybe it's a succession crisis when Palpatine finally dies and Imperial factions fight over who rules next. Maybe it's an economic collapse that the Empire can't manage. Maybe it's a successful rebel strike that destroys one of the Death Stars, proving they're not truly invincible. Maybe it's Vader's redemption, the Dark Lord turning on his master at a critical moment. Maybe it's the rise of a new generation of leaders on both sides, with different ideas about how the galaxy should be governed. Whatever the catalyst, change eventually comes. The Empire, built on fear and sustained by violence, contains the seeds of its own destruction. Its leaders' arrogance blinds them to vulnerabilities. Its reliance on superweapons makes it inflexible. Its cruelty creates endless enemies. The rebellion, meanwhile, learns and adapts, becoming more capable with each passing year. New technologies are developed. New tactics are perfected. New allies are found in unexpected places. Ultimately, the question this alternate timeline poses is, can freedom survive the absence of hope? Can resistance endure when victory seems impossible? The answer, based on human history and the nature of sentient beings, is complicated. Some resistance movements have persisted for generations under brutal oppression, keeping alive dreams of freedom through pure stubbornness and moral conviction. Others have been crushed completely, their members killed or assimilated, their cause forgotten. In our darkest timeline, the Star Wars galaxy would be a place of profound suffering, where the light side of the Force seems nearly extinguished and tyranny reigns supreme. But even in this darkness, sparks of resistance would flicker. The question isn't whether those sparks would immediately overthrow the Empire. They wouldn't. The question is whether they'd survive long enough burn bright enough to eventually ignite something larger. Whether a new hope, different from Luke Skywalker but equally powerful, might emerge from the ashes. The Death Star in this timeline becomes more than a weapon. It becomes a symbol of the ultimate expression of tyranny, the belief that sufficient force can solve all problems and control all beings. Its survival represents the triumph of that philosophy. But history, both real and fictional, suggests that philosophy ultimately fails. Power without legitimacy is unstable. Fear without respect breeds resentment. Control without consent requires constant vigilance and violence, exhausting even the strongest empire. So perhaps, decades after Scarif's failure, after countless worlds destroyed and trillions dead, after the rebellion seemed completely defeated, something would shift. A new generation who never knew the Republic but refuses to accept the Empire. A military leader who makes a critical mistake, a technological breakthrough, a Force user emerging from hiding, a conspiracy of Imperial officers. Some combination of factors would create an opening, a chance. And the rebellion, or what's left of it, would take that chance. They'd strike at the Death Star, probably with a plan far less elegant than Luke's trench run, but equally desperate. Would they succeed? In a storytelling sense, hope demands that eventually they would. That freedom, the light side of the Force, the basic decency of sentient beings, these things can't be permanently suppressed. The Empire's victory at Scarif would delay justice, not prevent it. But the cost of that delay, the suffering endured, would be almost incalculable. This is the tragedy of our alternate timeline. Not that the Empire would ultimately fall, but that its fall would take so much longer and cost so many more lives. The final confrontation, whenever it comes, would be climactic and devastating. Perhaps it happens 20 years after Scarif, perhaps 50. The details would depend on how events unfolded. But eventually, the rebellion would find or create an opportunity to strike at the heart of Imperial power. They might attack Coruscant directly, trying to kill the Emperor and decapitate the leadership. They might finally find the weakness in Death Star design they've been seeking for decades and use it to destroy both battle stations simultaneously. They might foment an empire-wide rebellion, coordinating uprisings on hundreds of worlds. They might turn Vader against the Emperor, using the conflict between father and son to create an opening. Whatever form the final battle takes, it would be cataclysmic. Fleets numbering thousands of ships engaged across multiple star systems, ground battles on dozens of worlds, political intrigue and assassination attempts, Force users dueling in conflicts that shape the fate of the galaxy. Millions would die in this final push, maybe billions. The cost would be staggering even in victory, and there's no guarantee of victory. The rebellion might fail even in this final attempt, crushed completely, leaving only scattered survivors to carry on the hopeless fight. But let's imagine they succeed. Imagine that against all odds, through sacrifice and courage and perhaps sheer luck, the rebellion destroys the Empire's leadership. The Emperor falls, struck down by Vader in a moment of redemption, or killed by rebel assassins, or consumed by his. It would take generations to heal. The new Republic, or whatever government emerges from the Empire's ashes, would face enormous challenges. How do you govern a galaxy where many people don't remember any government except the Empire? How do you rebuild trust after decades of tyranny? How do you punish Imperial war criminals without creating a cycle of revenge? How do you care for billions of refugees when resources are scarce? How do you prevent another wannabe emperor from exploiting the chaos to seize power? These questions don't have easy answers. The post-Empire galaxy would be messy, complicated, difficult. Some Imperial holdouts would refuse to surrender, creating insurgencies that might last decades. Some systems would want independence rather than joining a new galactic government. Some species and factions would seek revenge against collaborators and Imperial sympathizers. Economic inequality, political corruption, and social instability would plague the rebuilding efforts. But there would also be hope. Genuine hope, not just desperate defiance. The Empire fell. The Death Stars were destroyed. Freedom, however imperfect, returned to the galaxy. People could speak freely, travel freely, live without constant fear of Imperial reprisal. The Jedi, in whatever form they survived or were reborn, could emerge from hiding and operate openly. Art and culture could flourish without censorship. Children could grow up learning true history rather than Imperial propaganda. The heroes of the rebellion would be celebrated but also exhausted. They gave decades of their lives to the fight, lost friends and family, endured trauma and hardship. Many wouldn't survive to see the victory, dying in the countless battles leading up to the end. Those who did survive would be changed, scarred by their experiences. They'd face survivors' guilt, asking why they lived when so many others died. They'd struggle to adapt to peace after decades of war. Some would thrive in the new era, helping to build the future they fought for. Others would be lost, unable to find purpose without an enemy to fight. The galaxy's memory of this dark period would shape its culture for generations. Stories would be told about the worlds that died, about the heroes who resisted, about the ordinary people who chose courage over submission. Memorials would be built to honor the dead. Historians would study how the Republic fell and the Empire rose, trying to learn lessons that might prevent it from happening again. Philosophers would debate the nature of power, freedom, justice, and the eternal conflict between order and liberty. In conclusion, if the rebellion failed at Scarif, if the Death Star plans were lost forever, the galaxy would enter its darkest age. Alderaan would still burn, but it would be the first of many worlds to die. The Death Star would remain operational, an unstoppable weapon enforcing Imperial rule through terror. The rebellion would scatter, fracture, perhaps even break completely. Heroes like Luke Skywalker might never rise to prominence, never become the Jedi who restored hope. Han Solo would remain a smuggler. Leia would be imprisoned or dead. The Empire would consolidate power in ways that seemed permanent and unbreakable. But even in this darkness, even with hope reduced to embers rather than flames, resistance would persist. Because the desire for freedom, the rejection of tyranny, the belief that all beings deserve dignity and choice, these things are fundamental to sentient nature. They can be suppressed but not eliminated. They can be driven underground but not destroyed. The rebellion might fail at Scarif, might lose every major battle afterward, might see world after world destroyed, but somewhere someone would still resist. Someone would still fight. Someone would still believe that the Empire could fall and freedom could return. And that belief, no matter how small, no matter how seemingly futile, would keep alive the possibility that someday, somehow, the darkness would end. That the Death Star would be destroyed, not by a well-placed proton torpedo down an exhaust port, but through some other means: sabotage, defection, technical failure, or simple persistence outlasting tyranny. The path would be longer, bloodier, and more painful, but the destination, freedom and the fall of the Empire, would remain possible. Because in the end, that's what the Star Wars saga teaches us, that hope, even when seemingly extinguished, can survive and eventually triumph. Even if it takes generations, even if the cost is almost unbearable. Even if the heroes we expect never emerge, and different heroes, ordinary people doing extraordinary things, take their place. This is what would happen if the rebellion failed at Scarif. Not an immediate end to resistance, but a long, terrible struggle that would test the galaxy's spirit to its absolute limits. A timeline where darkness reigns for decades longer than it should, where the Death Star becomes a permanent scar on galactic civilization, where hope becomes a luxury rather than a certainty. But also, perhaps, a timeline that would prove even more conclusively that tyranny, no matter how powerful, no matter how technologically superior, cannot ultimately defeat the basic aspiration of beings to be free. The rebellion might fail at Scarif, but rebellion itself, the concept and the spirit, would endure. And that endurance, painful and costly as it would be, represents its own kind of victory, its own kind of hope.